It's raining outside, the perfect weather for writing. You've got your reading glasses on and your high-tech laptop computer open to the first page. You start to type, and then you think, wait, what the heck am I doing? Hello and welcome to the Writer Left YouTube channel. Today we're going to be talking about how to write your first chapter. For those of you that follow me on Instagram, remember to stay to the end of the video for a chance to be shouted out on my story.
So real quick before we get into this video, someone commented on my Instagram making fun of how I stacked the books in the background, and as a result, I stacked them even higher. So joke's on you, Joker1004.
So there are three main things that make a good first chapter. Those things are when you begin the chapter, the contents of the chapter, and what you focus on in that chapter. The first thing we're going to talk about is when to start your chapter. Personally, I like to start the first chapter as soon as the action begins. I don't want my audience to sit around and be bored for that first chapter, because usually, it's the first page or two that'll really grip your audience. You do, of course, want to introduce the setting, you want to introduce the characters and that stuff, but you want to do it in a way that's interesting and it also introduces the main plot. The way I like to think of it is I start with the inciting incident, what makes this adventure happen, and then roll back the clock just a little bit to a point where I can introduce the characters and then jump right into the plot. An example of a book that does this really well is The Hobbit. We start with Bilbo and Gandalf, we kind of get an introduction to them and their characters, and then pretty much immediately the dwarves start showing up, and we kind of see, Bilbo's panicking a little bit, and we see the timid side of him. And of course we're also introduced to the Shire, and the setting and everything like that, but then he kind of figures out, well, why are they all showing up here? Well, they need a burglar to go on their mission to get their gold back from Smaug, right? So that chapter does a really good job of, here's the setting, here are the characters, but also here's the plot. By the end of the chapter, Bilbo runs off with them on his great adventure. The next important thing for making a great first chapter is the focus. Now, my friend Ryan from Legendary Writing made a good video on whether you should focus on plot or character to start the story, and his answer was this. It's a trick question. You need to start with both your plot and your character. But the way I like to think of it is focus on your plot through your character, right? So put your character in a situation that both furthers the plot, but also shows who your character is. So for an example, my book, Evander Ross and the Lumen Core, it starts off with Evan sitting in a bathroom reading this ancient-looking book by himself because he doesn't want anyone else to know that he's reading this. This introduces Evan in a way that you see, well, just from this one situation, you can tell he cares a lot about his friends and what they think of him, but he also cares about this book and this something greater than just himself. The book is obviously important and the reader intuitively knows that it's magical, but at the same time the focus is on our character. Here's Evan, here's what he's doing, here's kind of the world he's in, here's his school, here's how he reacts to his friends. Sure, this other stuff is happening in the background, but the reader thinks, oh, the focus is on the character, even though plot things are happening as well. So the next thing that makes a really good chapter is, of course, the content of the chapter. What should be in a first chapter? You don't want it to be too long, otherwise the reader might lose interest. So you want to be sparing with your description. Obviously don't be vague, but walk that fine line between over-describing things and kind of losing the pace and not having anything visualized at all. So it's a fine line, but you got to find that balance. The first chapter also sets the tone narratively. It kind of sets up the humor, whether they should expect something funny throughout the story, whether they should expect wittiness or maybe violence. What they should expect from the story overall should be encapsulated in that first chapter. Not only this, but there should also be kind of a mini story within the first chapter, something that can be resolved from the start to the end. You want to wrap up that mini story, but you also want to leave room for mystery and give them a reason to turn to the next page. A good example of this is Percy Jackson.
Let's take a moment of silence to remember the horrible, horrible movie adaptations of the Percy Jackson book series. Okay, thank you for your time. Back to the video.
So we start off, we see Percy, we get a good sense of his character with, we have the bully who's, throwing peanut butter and jelly at Grover, and, Percy's starting to get riled up, he's pretty upset, and then the rest of the field trip kind of goes by, and then he ends up getting attacked by this crazy flying person who used to be his teacher, and then by the end of it he defeats her, and then everyone seems to have forgotten that it happened in the first place. You can see that whole thing is kind of a mini story in itself. Honestly, it could be a short story. It's really well written. We get a really good sense of Percy's voice almost immediately into the chapter. We get an introduction to the world with, Chiron, I'm sorry, I don't know how to say that. Everyone says it differently. We get a good sense of mystery at the end of it too, because everyone's forgotten, wait, who is his teacher? Well, obviously Percy remembers her. Why doesn't anyone else remember Miss Dodds? So this is a really good example of good content in a first chapter. So there you have it. Remember to start your story right before the main plot starts to get rolling, with enough time to introduce the characters and setting, and then remember to focus on the plot through the lens of your character so that your reader mostly gets to know the character while other plot things are happening in the background. And then, of course, remember to have a mini story that ends with a mysterious note or some note that makes the reader want to read more. Thanks for watching. If you feel like you learned something from this video, please leave a like and subscribe. And as promised, if you want a shout out on the right or left Instagram page, just leave a comment here, leave a like, just say something about the video. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be specific. At the end of the comment, just put your username on Instagram and I'll pick one of you guys and you'll be on the main story.
Feel free to help this channel get off the ground by sending this video to someone you think might appreciate it. Thanks again for watching. See you in the next video.